In the heart of a quiet savanna valley, where acacia trees cast long shadows across the red earth, lay a small village whose people lived close to the rhythms of their ancestors. Every morning began with the same ritual. The women swept the dusty courtyards, the elders lit incense at their family shrines, and the children ran barefoot toward the sound of pounding millet. In this village lived a widow named Amma, a woman no one envied yet everyone respected for her quiet strength. Life had not been gentle with her. Her husband, Kweku, once a skilled hunter known for bringing home meat during the harshest seasons, had died suddenly of a fever that no healer could cure. His passing left Amma alone with two small children, a daughter barely old enough to fetch water and a son who still clung to her cloth whenever thunder rolled across the sky. Without help, Amma struggled to keep her family alive. She had no cattle to trade, no large fields to harvest. The only land she owned was a small patch of millet behind her hut, and even that often yielded too little to fill 3 stomachs. Yet despite her hardships, Amma never abandoned the traditions she had grown up with. Inside her home, at the far end of the room, she kept a humble shrine for her ancestors and for her late husband. It was not grand like the shrines of wealthier families. It consisted of a cracked clay pot filled with white stones, a wooden carving worn smooth by years of touching, and a small bowl that had belonged to her husband, a bowl he used during festivals when offering food to their ancestors. Amma kept it clean, polished with ash and water even when she barely had the strength to wash her children's clothes. Each morning, she woke before the sun rose, gathering what little millet she had left to make porridge. The grains were often mixed with dust, and she had to separate them carefully, blowing the chaff away as the first light warmed her hands. When the porridge boiled, its smell filled the small hut, and her hungry children would sit close to the pot, watching eagerly. But before she served them, Amma always dipped a small portion into her husband's old bowl and carried it to the shrine. She placed the bowl down gently, murmuring a short prayer, a greeting to the ancestors, a word of gratitude for survival, and a quiet plea for protection. Some mornings her daughter asked why they could not eat everything, why they had to give away food when their stomachs still felt empty. Amma would smile softly, though her eyes revealed her own hunger. And she would answer the same way each time, "We remember those who walked before us. When we honor them, they do not forget us." Though her neighbors admired her devotion, they also whispered among themselves. Some said she was too attached to old customs, that hunger should come before ritual. Others believed her faith was the only thing keeping her family alive. Amma herself never argued. She simply continued with her life, fetching water from the far well, tending her small field, sewing her children's clothes from scraps others discarded. She never complained, even when her hands shook from exhaustion or when her children cried themselves to sleep. Yet beneath her calm determination, a storm was brewing. The rains had already begun to fail, and cracks formed in the once rich earth. The villagers spoke anxiously of drought, of sickness, of omens carried by the wind. Amma listened in silence, knowing that her family did not have the strength to survive a bad season. Every day she prayed harder, not for wealth or comfort, but simply for enough grain to feed her children for one more sunrise. What she did not know was that her small acts of devotion, her whispered prayers, her offerings of porridge, her refusal to abandon tradition even when hunger clawed at her, were being witnessed. The spirits of her ancestors, long silent, were listening. And soon, the hardship that had tested her heart would awaken something powerful, something unseen, something that would change not only her fate but the fate of the entire village. The first true sign of disaster arrived silently. One morning, when Amma stepped outside to inspect her small millet patch, she noticed the leaves curling inward like frightened hands. The soil beneath her feet was cracked, brittle, and hot to the touch even though the sun had barely risen. For weeks the sky had remained a hard, unforgiving blue, and the clouds that normally gathered in the afternoons had disappeared entirely. The rains were late, so late that even the elders, who prided themselves on remembering every drought and every miracle of the past 50 years, began to murmur about bad omens. Fires burned more slowly, water in the well tasted like dust, and the goats wandered farther from the village in search of grass. Day after day, Amma watched her millet weaken until she could no longer pretend that the plants would recover. Her grain jar, once weakly hopeful, now mocked her. She could see the bottom of it without even tilting it forward. There were only a handful of grains left. When she shook the jar, it made no sound, just a soft whisper like sand sliding across wood. Her children, too young to understand the severity of what was happening, felt the hunger more sharply than she did. Their bellies growled in the quiet evenings, and their faces grew thinner. One night, as they sat around the small fire, her son asked in a trembling voice, "Mama, why do the ancestors need our food when we have nothing?" Amma felt something inside her crack, more painfully than the earth beneath her feet. She held him close, stroking his hair. But she had no answer that could ease the ache in his voice. The truth was, even Amma herself was shaken. The drought had arrived like a thief, stealing hope day by day, and now it stood over her family like a shadow. She found herself staring at the ancestral shrine with a mixture of fear and confusion. Was her devotion foolish? Should she abandon the rituals? Should she give every last grain to her children and forget the old traditions until the danger had passed? The thoughts churned inside her like a storm she could not escape. For the first time in years, she hesitated before placing food at the shrine. But in her torment, she remembered Kwaku, his voice, his smile, the warmth of his hand when he assured her that their ancestors watched over them. She remembered his final words, whispered when he knew death was near, "No matter how little we have, Amma, show gratitude. The ancestors see the heart, not the offering." The memory struck her harder than hunger. She wiped her tears, lifted the grain jar, and decided to use the last of the millet. Whatever happened afterward would be guided by fate, not fear. In the dim morning light, she cooked the final batch of porridge. The pot looked strangely empty even as it boiled, and the smell was weaker than usual, as though the millet itself knew it was giving its last breath. Her children watched silently, understanding in their own way that this meal was different. When the porridge was ready, Amma dipped the spoon into the pot and hesitated. The bowl for the ancestors sat waiting at the shrine, its cracked clay reflecting the glow of the fire. Her heart thudded painfully. She could give everything to her children. No one would judge her. Not even the ancestors. But she lifted 2 small spoonfuls of porridge and placed them gently into the old bowl, barely enough to cover the bottom. Then she walked slowly to the shrine, her steps heavy, as though each one carried the weight of 1,000 doubts. She placed the offering before the wooden carving, bowed her head, and whispered in a trembling voice, "This is all I have left. Accept it with my heart." A single tear dropped onto the clay floor. That night the wind rose unexpectedly, swirling through the cracks in the hut like a restless spirit. Lightning flashed across the sky but never brought rain. In the darkness, Amma drifted into a deep, uneasy sleep, and there in the dream world stood a woman she had never met but felt she had always known, wrinkled, strong, radiant with a calm that felt older than time. The woman placed a hand on Amma's shoulder and spoke gently, "Child of our blood, dawn will bring what you need. Do not fear." Amma awoke with a gasp, her heart pounding. The dream lingered like smoke in the air. Was it a vision? A message? Or merely the desperate creation of a hungry mind? She did not know. But something in her chest felt different, as if a small flame had been rekindled where ashes had long been gathering. And somewhere in the distance, before the sun even rose, something moved quietly in the night, leaving behind a trail that only faith could follow. Amma rose before the first glow of dawn, her body heavy from a night filled with strange dreams and restless winds. The hut was quiet, her children slept curled together beneath their worn blanket. She stepped outside, breathing in the cool air, surprised to find it carrying a faint sweetness unlike anything she had smelled in months, a soft, warm scent drifting from the direction of the forest. At first she thought it was only her imagination, a trick of a desperate heart searching for hope. But when she took another breath, the scent grew stronger, tugging gently at her senses as if inviting her to follow. As she walked, her bare feet pressed into the cold morning soil, and she noticed something unusual near the edge of her yard. Footprints, large, soft, and oddly shaped, marked the earth. They were unlike any she had ever seen. They were not human, yet they did not resemble the tracks of any animal known to roam the savannah. The prints seemed to shimmer slightly under the faint starlight, as though touched by something not entirely of this world. A chill crept up her spine, not of fear, but of awareness. She followed the trail, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The footprints led her down a narrow path between thorn trees and toward the deeper forest where few villagers ventured alone. The scent grew stronger with every step, warm and golden like honey, melting under the sun. Then, as she reached a clearing, she stopped abruptly. Before her lay a massive fallen tree, split perfectly down the middle as if by the hand of an unseen giant. Its trunk was hollow, and inside it glowed with a soft amber light. She approached slowly, uncertain if she was awake or still wandering inside her dream. When she leaned closer, her breath caught in her throat. Nestled within the broken trunk was a huge beehive, untouched, intact, and overflowing with fresh honey that glistened like liquid gold. And yet there were no bees, no buzzing, no signs of danger. The hive seemed placed there deliberately, almost reverently, as though someone, or something, had prepared it specifically for her. Amma reached out with trembling fingers, dipping her hand into the golden pool. The honey was warm, thick, and impossibly clean. She tasted it and felt a surge of energy rush through her body, sweet and comforting, filling her with a strength she had not felt in months. Tears spilled down her cheeks. This was no mere accident. Something greater was at work. A gentle breeze circled her, lifting the edges of her wrapper cloth. It brushed against her skin like a familiar hand, like the warm touch of a blessing. She heard it then, not with her ears, but with her spirit, the soft whisper carried on the wind, "Share, and you will never lack." The same voice she had heard in her dream. The same presence that had touched her during the storm. Amma filled her calabash with honey, enough to feed her children for days, enough to trade for grain, enough to help other starving families. But she did not run home in excitement. She moved slowly, reverently, her heart filled with awe. With every step she felt the invisible presence of her ancestors surrounding her, guiding her. Back in the village, the scent of honey woke her children, who ran to her with wide eyes when they saw the dripping calabash. She gave them each a spoonful, watching the color return to their faces. Then, without hesitation, she walked to the ancestral shrine. She poured some of the honey into the old bowl, letting it pool like golden sunlight, and whispered her gratitude. But the blessings did not end there. Later that morning, when she opened her grain jar to prepare food, she froze. The jar, which had been almost empty the day before, now held enough millet to make a full pot of porridge. Amma stood motionless, her hands hovering over the jar as disbelief washed over her. She dipped her hand inside and felt the grain slip through her fingers, clean, plentiful, and real. It was not overflowing, not extravagant, but it was enough. Enough to eat. Enough to live. Enough to hope. The miracle repeated itself day after day. The jar never filled completely, yet it never emptied. Every time she reached inside, she found just enough for another meal. News of the strange blessing spread quickly across the village. Some came to see it themselves, others whispered that Amma was favored by spirits. A few doubted, murmuring that it could only be coincidence or trickery. But those who looked into Amma's eyes, calm, humble, glowing with quiet gratitude, felt the truth settle into their hearts. Amma did not boast, did not claim to be chosen. She simply shared what she had. Honey for hungry children. A handful of millet for an elderly neighbor. A bowl of porridge for a woman whose own jar had run dry. And each time she shared, the breeze came again, soft, warm, approving, reminding her of the whisper, share, and you will never lack. She did not yet understand the full meaning of the blessing. But soon the entire village would learn that when one heart remains faithful in the darkness, light eventually finds its way back, not just to one home, but to all who stand around it. It did not take long for Amma's quiet miracle to ripple beyond her small hut and into the heart of the entire village. At first, only a few neighbors noticed her newfound strength. They saw her children walking with livelier steps, their eyes bright again rather than sunken with hunger. They saw steam rising from her cooking pot more often, and they wondered silently how a widow with nothing had suddenly begun to stand taller than even the wealthiest families. Then came the whispers. Mothers fetching water at the well murmured that Amma had somehow found honey, so much that her children's mouths were stained gold. Old men resting beneath the palm trees argued whether she had been blessed by the forest spirits or saved by a hunter passing through. But the story grew stronger and clearer each day as more people visited her home and saw for themselves what could not be denied. One by one, hungry villagers arrived at Amma's door, expecting to find her clinging protectively to her food. Instead, they witnessed something entirely different. Amma offered each visitor a bowl of warm porridge, her hands steady and gentle, as though she had more than enough to spare. When they asked how she managed to cook every day while everyone else's grain jars sat empty, she simply replied with a soft smile, "The ancestors provide what is needed." To those who looked skeptical, she invited them to lift the lid of her grain jar. They peered inside and saw a small but steady supply of millet, never overflowing, never shrinking. Some staggered back in awe, others fell to their knees in prayer. Slowly, the truth spread. The elders called a meeting beneath the ancient baobab tree at the center of the village. It was a place where important decisions had been made for generations, and its massive roots were said to hold the memories of the ancestors themselves. When Amma arrived, carrying her youngest child on her hip, the crowd parted for her. Not because she demanded respect, but because something in her presence had changed, something calm, humble, yet undeniably powerful. The eldest among them, a man named Obiari whose beard was as white as ash, asked her to tell the village what she had experienced. Amma hesitated. She was not used to speaking before so many people, nor did she think herself worthy of teaching anyone. But then a warm breeze curled gently around her ankles, lifting dust from the ground. She recognized it instantly, the same presence that had guided her in the forest. With new strength settling into her voice, she began to speak. She told them of the drought, of her empty jar, of her children's hunger. She told them of the night she chose to offer her last spoonful of porridge to the ancestors instead of keeping it for herself. She recounted the dream, the strange footprints, the fallen tree glowing with honey, and the whispering voice promising that she would never lack if she shared what she had. A hush fell over the crowd as she spoke. No one shifted. No one scoffed. Even the non-believers felt the truth vibrating in her words like the deep hum of a sacred drum. When she finished, Obiari closed his eyes and raised his hands to the sky. "We have forgotten," he declared, his voice trembling. "We have turned away from the ones who built our paths. We have chased comfort and wealth, and neglected the shrines that once connected us to the spirits." Murmurs of guilt and recognition swept through the villagers. Many bowed their heads, remembering dust-covered shrines they had not cleaned in years, offerings they had skipped because they were too tired, too busy, too concerned with their own troubles. That evening, something remarkable happened. Families who had long neglected their ancestral altars began sweeping their yards, gathering herbs, and lighting incense. The scent of burning sage and palm oil filled the air, drifting between the huts like a gentle call to unity. Mothers taught their children how to kneel before the shrine, fathers brought out old carvings once hidden away, and elders retold stories long forgotten. For the first time in months, the village felt alive with purpose. People shared what little they had, water, firewood, leftover scraps of food, trusting that generosity carried power beyond the material. Days passed, and as the villagers rekindled their bond with their ancestors, the sky began to change. The clouds returned, heavy and grey, rolling in from the horizon like slow-moving giants. The wind carried the smell of rain. And then, one night, the heavens opened. Thunder cracked across the valley, and rain fell in sheets upon the thirsty earth. Children ran outside laughing, their feet splashing in puddles, their faces lifted to the sky. Farmers stood beside their fields, letting the water soak their clothes as tears mingled with the rain. The millet grew tall again, greener than it had been in decades. Streams refilled, animals returned, and the land itself seemed to breathe after months of suffocating heat. People whispered that it was Amma who had opened the way for the blessing. But Amma only shook her head gently whenever she heard such praise. "The ancestors watched us all," she would say. "I merely listened." What she did not say, what she kept quietly in her heart, was the sense of warmth she still felt in the wind, as though unseen hands continued to guide her steps. And throughout the village, families found themselves repeating the lesson her life had begun to teach. When a single soul chooses humility, gratitude, and compassion even in times of darkness, the light they kindle can spread to every home around them. In the end, the tale of the sculptor and the sacred wood stands as a timeless reminder of the moral foundations embedded in African traditional religions, that all creation carries a spiritual essence, that arrogance leads to destruction, and that humanity survives only when it walks with humility among the living and the unseen. The sculptor's downfall was not simply a punishment, it was a consequence woven into the spiritual fabric of the world. By ignoring the warnings of the elders, he cut himself off from the wisdom of those who came before him. By carving without reverence, he severed the bond between art and the spirit realm. And by refusing to acknowledge the sacredness of the forest, he denied the interconnectedness between humans, nature, and ancestors. These themes remain deeply relevant in a world where people often chase personal achievement at the cost of respect, responsibility, and community. The story teaches that true mastery, whether in art, skill, or any form of creation, must be rooted in humility and gratitude, for talent is not owned but entrusted. It also reminds us that disrespect toward the unseen world often translates into harm toward the seen world. Neglecting tradition weakens culture, ignoring elders weakens community, and exploiting nature weakens life itself. The sculptor's tragedy warns against the modern tendency to view the environment as a resource rather than a living presence deserving care. In many parts of Africa today, rituals honoring sacred groves, rivers, and trees have been revived not only for spiritual reasons but also to protect ecosystems threatened by human greed. Likewise, communities emphasize the importance of heeding ancestral wisdom in resolving conflicts, maintaining harmony, and guiding personal decisions. Just as the sculptor's art was destroyed when he abandoned humility, people today may find their progress crumbling if it is built on disrespect toward tradition, toward nature, or toward the people who guide them. The villagers' response also carries a lesson. They mourn the loss not only of a talented artist but of a young man who could have enriched the community had he chosen a different path. Their grief reflects the communal nature of African moral thinking, where one person's failure affects the entire group. This reinforces the idea that morality is never an individual matter. It is a shared responsibility. Ultimately, the story urges viewers to reflect on their own actions and relationships. It asks whether we honor the wisdom that life offers us through elders, culture, and nature, or whether we chase pride at the cost of spiritual and personal grounding. It reminds us that every choice shapes our connection to the world around us, and that by choosing respect, humility, and awareness, we keep the path between humans and the unseen world clear and balanced. In this way, the sculptor's fate becomes more than a tale of punishment. It becomes a guiding light, showing that brilliance without humility collapses, but intention guided by reverence leads to harmony, creativity, and a meaningful life.